Labor Day has passed us. You can no longer wear white, but you still have the Issues Watch podcast. Hello and welcome to the Issues Watch podcast. I'm Brad Muniz, your host for the bi-weekly accounting and auditing episodes. I'm an assurance principal with Clifton Larson Allen. This episode qualifies for nano CPE credit. If you're interested in earning CPE credit for this episode, hit the pause button now and head over to njcpa.org/nano to find out how. A quick disclaimer, the views and statements expressed herein are my own and not necessarily those of NJCPA or CLA. Okay, so everybody knows that Frank Boudelet and I regularly do New Jersey Law and Ethics course, and there's a topic that we talk about in there that I see a lot of time when I'm reviewing financial statements and work papers, particularly work papers, isn't being addressed, and I see it usually when I'm doing peer reviews, it's not being addressed properly, and that's the threats. Okay, now before I get to the threats, I want to remind people, I mentioned the law and ethics. You have until December 31st, if you haven't already, December 31st, 2023, to take the New Jersey Law and Ethics session. Make sure you get it done. There's no waiver on it. You have, by the time this is done, you have under 4 months to get that. By the time this airs, you have under 4 months to get that session out of the way. And you have to take it 4 hours in one clip, live session. Doesn't have to be in person, but it has to be live, can't be self-study. Okay, so the threats. Nearly every attest, audit review, engagements under PCOB, et cetera, SSAEs will have a threat related to it. Okay, now what is a threat? A threat is a relationship or circumstance that could impair independence. Now in a compilation, you could have a threat, which is a relationship or circumstance that could impair independence. I'm going to keep repeating that because I want you to understand what a threat is. Even in a compilation, you can have it, but you can be not independent in a compilation. You just have to say it. So you still have to consider the threats. In every engagement, you should identify, are there threats and what's the extent of the threat? Now, we could end it right there and you could say, oh, okay, I got it. But a lot of people don't understand what the threats are or type of threats they are and doesn't allow them to evaluate it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the threats that was identified within the AICPA Code of Conduct, and then there are other threats that you could think that you could always come up with in your, by yourself too. But these are the ones that you should consider. There's a handful of them, so I'm going to read through it. The first one is adverse. Adverse is a member will not act with objectivity because the member's interests are in opposition with the interests of the attest client. Okay, now you're saying, well, we're supposed to be independent, so we don't have to be aligned with them. Here's where they're going with it. An example is either the attest client or the member commencing litigation against the other. So you don't have a clear approach to this because if in this situation, if one is suing the other, you may not have a good objectivity when you're approaching items. Advocacy. Advocacy, a member will promote an attest client's interest or position. Now, I'm not in all of them, I won't give examples, but a couple of them I will. Here, you promote an attest client's securities. And we actually had somebody ask one time, can you do investment banking for an attest client? And that's no, because you're out there promoting the client to try and sell them, okay? Provides expert witness services. And I've seen somebody do that where they had an audit client and they were going to be an expert witness, on the stand for that particular client. You can't do that. This one I found very interesting. Every time I read this one, it reminds me that it's out there. Represent an attest client in the U.S. tax court or in another public forum. So you have a client that you do an audit for, but you also do the tax work and you want to represent them in the tax court. You can't do that, okay? It's either one or the other. The big ones that we start going into, and if you see when Frank talks about the New Jersey Law and Ethics, he talks about this one a lot, and another one I'll mention in a little bit, familiarity. Because of a long, close relationship with the attest client, a member will become sympathetic to the client's interests and too accepting of the client's work or work product. So we see this a lot when people had clients for a very long time. And we're going to talk about safeguards later on. I had an issue one time when I was dealing with one of my former partners where I kept trying to talk to him about a client issue. And I just felt that he was not being objective because he knew the client for so long, he worked on the client for so long, and he was being lenient and accepting too much of the stuff that the client was telling them, and we got into a big argument about it in the office. But that's one of the reasons why, PCOB, and I know we're talking about AICPA Code of Conduct, PCOB has rotation, partner rotation, engagement quality review rotation, and that's why other people recommend, if not firm rotation, at least partner rotation. Okay. The next one that Frank mentions a lot is management participation. A member will take on the role of client, role of a test client management, otherwise assume management responsibilities. I mean, it's fairly obvious. Where we see it a lot, or we don't see it, where I see it potentially come up is you're involved in some of the accounting aspects, and you're actually making the decision. Recording transactions for a client, okay? Making journal entries without them accepting responsibilities. Now, when we record transactions, if they code them for us and they tell us where to put them, you're not making the management decision. But if you're actually coding transactions and recording them without them accepting responsibility, then there's management participation. Self-interest, a member could benefit financially or otherwise from an interest or a relationship with an attest client. That's fairly evident, okay? People talk about this all the time, but you do have to be careful because I do see, people having relatives that are owners of the company, and they say, well, it's a distant relative. Well, it's somebody that we don't talk to in the family. You have independence in mind and independence in appearance. You have to be very careful with that. Last one that's a real big one, it's not the last one we're going to talk about, real big one is self-review. Threat that a member will not appropriately evaluate the results of a previous judgment made or service performed or supervised by a member or an individual in the member's firm, that the member will rely on that service in forming an opinion as part of an attest engagement. Self-review is a really, really big one for any firm in particular, okay? Sometimes you'll see it with the smaller firms because they have a little bit difficulty coming up with the safeguard, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But I see it at all firms, because if you're doing the work and you don't have a proper review of it, there is a self-review aspect going on. What we do see a lot of times is that people are preparing the financial statements. We as auditors, accountants that do reviews, compilations, we're allowed to prepare the financial statements. Not for public entities, broker-dealers, you're not allowed to prepare the financial statements there, but for regular audits, review, comps, you're allowed to prepare the financial statements. Now, what happens is management's supposed to have somebody appointed that has the skills, knowledge, experience to review the work that you do, not actually review it and reperform it, but understand the service that you're doing and accept responsibility. Now, you can't just rely on them doing that. You have to have other measures. With the smaller firms, it's harder because you don't have somebody that can review your work sometimes. At other firms, like what we do is we have a second review process that reviews the financial statements. Somebody completely independent of the job even reviews the financial statements and work papers, some work papers to some extent. And that's the aspect that we have to get over the self-review. The smaller firms where you don't have somebody else, what we recommend, I say all the time, is find a friend, set up a process where they look at some of your financial statements, you look at some of their financial statements, and there's at least some coverage there. Be happy to, if you want to reach out to me, be happy to talk to you, give some ideas. Last one that I'll talk about is undue influence. A member will subordinate his or her judgment to an individual associated with the attest client or any relevant third party due to individual's reputation or expertise. Aggressive or dominant personality. Now, we've all had this at some point where a client says, if you don't do it, I'll just fire you, I'll find somebody else. They do that, say fine, go ahead, all right? We see it a lot of times. One of the issues I always say that one of the toughest clients to have is a former auditor. Because you don't know how many times they turn to you, they say, it's immaterial. You don't have to look at it, it's immaterial. Well, let me determine the materiality. Oh, hit my mic, I'm sorry. Let me determine the materiality. Let me determine the work papers I'm looking at. I remember I had a client one time said to me, I'm not going to give you that. You don't need that information. And I said to them, I make the decisions on what I want to look at. You don't make the decision on what I want to look at. I said, and now you're raising my concern. And they said, why am I raising your concern? I said, because if you're starting to determine what you think I should look at, you might be starting to determine what you think you need to give to me, openly. And that made me nervous, and it elevated my concern as related to the audit. And it was a public company type of audit, so I was very concerned about the fraud in that aspect. Okay, last thing I want to close on this is relates to this. You have threats. We all have some sort of threats. You have to have safeguards in place to reduce the threats. What's a safeguard? It's an action or measure that eliminates or reduces the threats to an acceptable level at which a reasonable and informed third party would likely conclude that the auditor is in compliance with the code. There's 3 broad categories. It's created by the profession, legislation, or regulation. It's implemented by the client or employing organization, but you can't just rely solely on that. I said it before. And it's implemented by the firm. So you identify the threat, you evaluate the threat, you identify a safeguard that addresses it, and you have to determine, does that safeguard adequately address it? That's the process you go through. There are tools available that the AICPA has put out. I recommend that you look at them. They're great tools. Okay, in closing, I want to share a couple of reminders from the New Jersey State Board of Accountancy. If you've had an address change in the past 3 years, be sure to submit that change to the Board of Accountancy by September 30th. You're supposed to do it within 30 days, I believe, but make sure you do it by September 30th because it's going to affect the renewals. Speaking of renewals, renewals will be mailed out to the licensees on November 2nd. Okay, it's 60 days before year end, which is November 2nd. If you don't get it on or around November 2nd, check, make sure your address is correct, call the state, reach out to the state board because you don't want to miss this renewal. If you still need to fulfill your law and ethics requirements, you can access the schedule of upcoming in-person and online ethics courses at njcpa.org/ethics. And lastly, be sure to join the NJCPA Accounting and Audit Standards Interest Group. Sign up for free at njcpa.org/groups. Thank you for watching or listening.